Chapter 15. Rick.
On March 1st, 1956, in the town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, I came into this world wide-eyed and ready for adventure. In nearby Crofton, a small rural town of no more than 900 people, my mother and grandmother raised me along with my two younger brothers and two younger sisters. Crofton, being as small as she was, still had a pair of railroad tracks running right through the center of town. We were divided by those tracks. The right side is where all the white folks lived, and there was our side, the only side I would have known for many years. I called my mother Barbara and my grandmother Mama, since my mother worked long hours at the Outwood State Hospital for the mentally unbalanced. My grandmother did most of the raising of us kids. That's why we called her Mama. She's not only one who really mothered us for all those early years, but my father was never in the picture. Mama was your typical Southern black grandmother. She raised us with an iron fist. If you stepped out of line, and I did many times, she would use a belt or a switch on us. I can tell you this, every whipping I got, I deserved. Today they call it child abuse, but from where I stand, Barbara or Mama never abused any of us. They just loved us until it hurt. If we messed up, we needed to be put back on the right path, and nothing does that better than a good old dance with the buckle. I enjoyed school and never really understood segregation until I was entering in the last half of elementary school. From grades 1 to 3, I attended an all-black school. To me, it was normal, and that was that. In 1965, as I entered the 4th grade, I entered into a segregated school. Looking back, I remember thinking that all of the attention we were getting was hilarious. Sure, for the first week or so, they called us names. Then as quickly as insults started, they ended. After the first week or two, we were no longer something new and strange to look at. We were school kids, just like the rest. I think the white kids were just as shocked as we were at the whole situation. During my school career, I kept a pretty busy schedule. I worked at local farms to earn enough money to pay for my needs for the following school year. I also played in the band, played sports, and had tons of homework to keep me busy. Let's not forget the chores around the house that I was responsible for. I never had a spare moment. I slept well at night. I graduated high school in 1975 and immediately encountered my first brush with the law. Just before graduation, a few of my friends and I, for no reason, decided to head over to the next town and rob a small mom-and-pop grocery store. We walked away from there with only a few dollars each. It was one of those stupid moments when you do something that changes your life's direction forever. I got busted. I was found guilty, and why not, I was. The judge gave me 5 years in the state pen. I served 2 before being released on probation. I'll tell you, those years on probation were hotter than doing time. The authorities made me account for every waking moment, every step, and every breath. I was lucky as an ex-con to get a job at my mom's hospital learning to be a nurse's aide. Once my probation obligations to the state of Kentucky were fulfilled, I decided to try my luck in California. I tried my hand at various jobs in the Los Angeles area. I even landed a job working for the Los Angeles County as a building maintenance employee. I did that for between 3 and 4 years. All in all, I lived in Los Angeles for 16 years before hitting the road once again. There is an Ernest Borgnine movie made back in 1973 called Emperor of the North. In this flick about riding the rails during the Great Depression, Ernest Borgnine played a cruel conductor named Shack. Now, Shack had only one pleasure in life, and that was catching bums riding his train. When I decided to hit the road and see what adventures lay before me, I decided to ride the rails, just like the hobos in the movie. Sure, I took some buses and hitchhiked, but hoboing on the rails was an entirely different experience, one that I'll cherish forever. I ran into many railroad employees like Shaq, but I always kept able to stay one step ahead of them. Plus, I can run really fast when needed. There are dangers riding the rails. You have to sleep with one eye open at all times. Or if you are traveling with a companion, take turns. One sleeps while the other stays on guard for any potential trouble. It's the solo guys or gals who get to sleep with all of their worldly possessions right next to them, unguarded, that become targets for abuse, robbery, or even worse, rape and murder. Now, there are the skinheads and other hate groups who focus only on one thing, targeting minorities. We as a society have come a long, long way, but in some ways we are still stuck in the dark ages. There are the dangers of living the life of a hobo. Come to think of it, it's not much different than living on the streets. If given a choice, I would take riding the rails over sleeping in parks or beneath overpasses or bridges. I traveled the entire United States for almost 10 years, stopping in Tucson every time I found myself in the neighborhood. I traveled light, carrying only a backpack filled with what I thought I needed for that phase of the journey. I still had some basic possessions, but they would have slowed me down, so I left them with family in Los Angeles. These things are still waiting for me there. In 1997, I started thinking that I needed to find a place to settle down and call home. Tucson was a logical choice, so I was Arizona bound. Once I arrived and got settled in, I started going back to nursing school to finish what I started so many years earlier. I finished my education and worked in the nursing field for 4 or 5 years before I started making some very serious bad decisions. I've always enjoyed having a drink now and then, or maybe a joint or two, but they were never addictions for me. I looked at them as social activities, just like the businessman who comes home from work and enjoys a martini or two. I used to grow weed in my mama's garden back when I was 13 or 14 years old. She never knew what it was. The problem today is that drugs are easier to get than groceries. You can get anything, anytime, anywhere. Well, one day after working a hard long shift, I did a few lines of coke and started to relax. I was letting the stresses of the day float away. This was when I made the wrong decision, a decision that would change me and my destiny forever. I decided to sell the little coke I had left. I had better uses for the money, and so I headed out to find someone looking to score. In 2004, I was sentenced to 8 3/4 years in prison for trafficking cocaine, which I was able to plea bargain down to 3.5 years. My previous prison record didn't impress the judge. Once I paid my debt to society, I knew it was time to do things right. Every time I visited Tucson in the past, I knew to stop by at the Primavera Foundation. Primavera had a reputation of being a good place to go when you were down and out. They would take care of you any way they could. Back in 1974, I met a woman there named Rachel. We hit it off and sort of became an item. When I got out of prison, not that long ago, Rachel and I immediately joined up and worked on improving our situation as a couple. We moved into an apartment, and for the most part, things were going well. Problem was, Rachel had a drinking problem and spent most of the money she got her hands on to feed her habit. I tried to control her spending, but didn't do a very good job at it. Eventually, we were evicted, landing us back out on the street. We stayed in motels or in homeless camps. But my goal was to get back into a place we could call home. Rachel was starting to get very sick, and this concerned me a lot. There were days when she couldn't walk. She was getting worse and worse. We would spend countless hours talking about the future and including her death. She knew her days were numbered, and so did I. I promised Rachel that I would not let her die on the streets as a homeless person. This was a promise that I was going to keep. On October 13, 2009, we moved into an apartment, wanted our own place, our home. On December 14, 2009, exactly 2 months and 1 day later, Rachel died. That horrible day was less than a week ago, and the sting of her passing still hurts. Rachel was getting weaker and weaker by the day. Her liver was shutting down and the rest of her body was following. On December 14th, around 1 p.m., I dialed 911. Her color turned ashen and her breathing was labored. I found myself in the emergency room, watching the woman I loved fade away, and I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I didn't want to be alone. I was scared. I called the Primavera Foundation and spoke with Diana. The person in charge told her what was going on. Diana was the only other person I knew I could count on. My call to her was at 1:50 p.m. and by 2:10 p.m. Diana was standing with me in the ER. With Diana on one side of the hospital bed and me on the other, we both held Rachel's hands, talking to her, praying for her, trying to hold back the tears. At 2:45, Rachel, my partner, my friend, my lover, left me to go and be with the Lord. Diana cried while I stood there, stoic, numb to the events that just happened. Diana came over to me and placed her arms around me. I held into her, thinking that I would comfort her while she cried. As soon as we embraced, the floodgates opened to my soul, and I cried like I'd never cried before. We stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity. I didn't want to let go of the security that Diana was giving to me. When we finally separated, wiping tears from our faces, I spoke the only words that I could muster up. I admitted my fear. My bowed head, I uttered, "Diana, I am now all alone." Diana understood. I will always have the utmost respect for her and what she does for the people living on the streets. She really cares. There is good and bad about living on the streets. Now for me, I am still living in my little apartment, the home I made for Rachel. There are lots of bad things about living on the streets. For example, when it rains, you get wet and your bones ache. The wintertime is cold, and that is when you see most of your friends disappear into the morgue. The worst thing about living on the streets is living on the streets. If you're going to survive on the streets, you need to find a way to beat the odds, stay healthy, and avoid trouble. Now, the only good thing about living on the streets is getting off the streets. There are just too many folks out there who never experienced getting off the streets, and for them I do pray. I've done it for a few times, and believe me, there's no better feeling in the world. With Rachel gone and my finding myself all alone, I do admit I'm having a rough time of it. I know I need to go on and do what I need to do. I need to face the reality of the situation and allow my time self to grieve. I'm working on that part right now, and who knows how long it will last. I will leave that up to God. I do find it helpful to talk about her passing, and I will continue to do so until all I have to say has been said. I did decide to move back to California to be with family and friends, but will remain in Tucson for at least a few more months before leaving. There isn't much left for me in Tucson except for memories, good and bad, bitter and sweet. I was raised as a Christian and attended a Methodist church every Sunday as a child. When I was living on the rails or in prison, I didn't get much time in a church. Once Rachel and I got together, we both became regular attendees. She and God recharged my spiritual batteries. I now pray every day. If I was to give advice to people passing a homeless person on the street, I would have to say don't be prejudiced or judgmental about other people's lives. The person you see on the street could quite easily be you. Be thankful for what you have, and if you can't afford to give $1 or two, then how about offering a handshake or a smile? These few simple things can save somebody's life. Now for the advice for the homeless person reading this story, don't stay down on yourself. A lot of people who are down on their luck just give up and drop to the side because of a bad day, week, month, or even year. Get up and straighten yourself up. If you have an addiction, then deal with it. Deal with the uncomfortable truth that you're an addict and find the help you need. There's a lot of help out there, and all you have to do is reach out and grab it. Sadly, most of the homeless are homeless because they choose to be. I choose not to be. I promised Rachel that I would not let her die on the street, and I kept my promise. I think it's now time for me to start making some promises to myself and to God.